She looked at me across the cafe, her eyes steady, her smile just a little too knowing. Then she leaned forward and said softly, "You're playing with fire." And the strangest part? I didn't want to put it out. The first time I noticed her, the cafe was almost empty. It was one of those afternoons where the rain just refused to let up, steady and unhurried, drumming against the windows like it had nowhere else to be. Inside, the air smelled of ground coffee and old wood, a little sanctuary from the gray world outside. I'd come in to escape the rain, maybe to get some work done, maybe just to sit somewhere warm. But almost immediately, my attention drifted to her. She was sitting by the window, where the light was softest, the kind that makes colors richer and shadows gentler. A book lay open in front of her, one hand holding the page as if she wasn't in any rush to turn it. Every few seconds she'd stir her coffee absent-mindedly, the silver spoon clinking softly against the porcelain. She wasn't reading quickly, or even really reading at all. It was like she was savoring both the words on the page and the silence around them. She had that kind of presence that made you notice her without trying. Not loud or showy. Graceful. The sort of beauty that comes from being comfortable in your own skin. Her hair, dark with a few strands of silver, caught the dim cafe light whenever she shifted. Her posture was relaxed, almost regal, but there was a stillness to her face, a quiet inwardness, that suggested she wasn't just passing time. She was waiting for something. Or maybe, she'd been waiting a long time already. I told myself not to stare. I failed. More than once. And then, without warning, she looked up. Our eyes met across the cafe. It wasn't just a passing glance. No, it was deliberate, like she wanted me to know she'd caught me. And for a second, I thought about looking away, pretending I'd just been lost in thought. But there was something about her gaze that pinned me there. Steady. Calm. A little amused. My chest tightened, the way it does when you've been called out but you don't mind it. Her eyes lingered on mine just long enough to make me feel the weight of it, before she lowered them again, back to her book, as if nothing had happened. But something had. At least for me. I sat there, pretending to scroll through my phone, but my heart wasn't in it. The jazz playing over the cafe speakers felt softer somehow, like even the music was conspiring to slow me down, to make me notice every detail, the faint curve of her smile, the gentle rhythm of her fingers tapping the table, the way the rain haloed her reflection in the window. I didn't know who she was, or why her presence felt so magnetic. All I knew was that, for the first time in a long time, the world outside could wait. Because in that moment, the woman by the window was all I could see. I thought that brief glance was the end of it. That she'd go back to her book, I'd go back to pretending I wasn't completely distracted, and the moment would dissolve into the background hum of the cafe. But she didn't let it dissolve. A few minutes later, I felt her eyes on me again. It's strange how you can feel someone's attention, almost like a warmth brushing against your skin. I looked up, and sure enough, she wasn't reading anymore. Her chin rested lightly against her hand, elbow propped on the table, and she was watching me with that same calm, amused expression. When our eyes met, this time she didn't look away. Instead, she tilted her head just slightly, the way someone does when they've figured you out. A faint smile tugged at her lips, half playful, half warning. And then, in a voice low enough that I almost thought I'd imagined it, she said, "You're playing with fire." For a second, I just stared at her. The words hung between us like smoke, teasing, but edged with something deeper. Her tone wasn't scolding, not even serious. It was amused. Almost staring me. I felt heat rise in my face. I must have looked ridiculous, caught like a kid with his hand in the cookie jar. I gave a nervous laugh, rubbing the back of my neck. Was I that obvious? Her smile deepened, though her eyes remained steady on mine. You weren't subtle. The way she said it, it wasn't dismissive. It was almost inviting. Like she wanted me to admit it, to acknowledge that I had, in fact, been staring. I scrambled for something to ground myself, fingers curling around the warm porcelain of my coffee cup. The ceramic felt hot against my skin, anchoring me. In my defense, I said, trying to sound casual. You looked like you belonged in this place more than anyone else. That earned me a soft laugh. Low, melodic, and entirely too disarming. Is that your excuse? She asked, raising a brow. Her movements were so subtle, yet everything about them carried weight. The way she leaned forward slightly across her table, the way the light caught the silver of her earring as she tilted her head, it was impossible not to notice. I could feel my heartbeat in my throat. I wasn't used to being the one on the defensive. Most conversations I had were easy, thoughtless. But with her, every word mattered. Every glance seemed to pull me further into something I didn't quite understand. And maybe that's why I couldn't look away. She let a beat of silence stretch, then smirked faintly, as though she'd decided something. Careful, she said softly, her voice wrapping around me like smoke. Fire doesn't always burn gently. And just like that, she dropped her gaze back to her book. As if she hadn't just shifted the entire gravity of the room. But I knew better. She was teasing me, inviting me, warning me, all at once. And the truth was, I'd already stepped too close to the flame to retreat. When she looked back down at her book, I thought that might be the end of it. The playful warning, the smirk, the little flicker of something I couldn't quite name. But a moment later, she did something I never expected. She closed the book. Not slowly, not reluctantly. She pressed the cover shut with a kind of finality, then looked directly at me again. Her eyes held mine without hesitation. And then, with a small gesture, just a subtle tilt of her head, she motioned toward the empty chair across from her table. I froze for half a heartbeat, unsure if I was imagining it. But she raised one brow, that same teasing expression from before, as if to say, well? Are you coming or not? I stood, trying not to look like I was rushing, even though every part of me felt wired and restless. Crossing the short distance to her table felt longer than it should have. My palms were slightly damp, my pulse unreasonably loud in my ears. When I sat down, the world outside the window seemed to vanish. The cafe, the rain, the soft hum of jazz, it all blurred into the background. All I could focus on was her. Brave, she said softly, stirring the last of her coffee. Or reckless. I managed a crooked smile. I thought I'd take my chances. Her eyes lingered on me, amused but probing, as though she was peeling back layers without needing me to say a word. You can't help yourself, can you? Looking. Wondering. Trying to read me like one of your books. Caught off guard, I chuckled. You make it sound like a crime. Maybe it is, she replied, though her smile softened the words. She leaned back slightly, her hand brushing her chin, fingers elegant, nails clicking faintly against the ceramic cup. Or maybe it's just curiosity. Dangerous curiosity. The conversation slid effortlessly from there, like we were stepping into a rhythm that had been waiting for us. She teased me about my age, guessing too low on purpose just to see me protest. I admitted that I noticed details about people, their gestures, their pauses, the things they don't say. Her laughter was warm, but there was something beneath it. A quietness. A shadow. At one point, when she reached across the table for the sugar jar, her fingertips grazed the inside of my wrist. It was nothing, a simple, passing touch. But it sent a jolt through me, sharp and electric, like the moment before a storm breaks. She didn't pull away quickly. She let her hand linger for the smallest fraction of a second longer than necessary. Then she withdrew, eyes glinting with mischief, as though she knew exactly what that brief contact had done to me. I tried to steady my breath, but the truth was, I felt completely unsteady. She carried herself with such quiet confidence, yet every now and then her voice would dip, and I'd catch a glimpse of something more fragile hiding underneath. The rain outside grew heavier, tapping harder against the glass. Inside, it felt like time was stretching, like the cafe was just the two of us now, her, with her teasing words and unspoken vulnerabilities, and me, caught between the fire she warned me about and the pull I couldn't resist. Time slipped strangely while we sat together. I couldn't have told you how long we'd been talking. Minutes blurred into hours, and the cafe around us thinned out slowly, first the students with laptops, then the hurried business types, until only a few quiet souls remained. Even the staff moved more languidly now, wiping counters, stacking chairs, preparing for the night. But at our little table by the window, none of that seemed to matter. She had leaned slightly forward at some point, her elbow resting on the table, her cheek against her hand as she listened. I realized she wasn't just humoring me, she was truly listening. Her eyes, soft brown flecked with something warmer, stayed steady on mine whenever I spoke. And in between, when silence stretched, she didn't rush to fill it. She let it breathe. It was in one of those silences that it happened. She looked down at her empty cup, tracing the rim with her fingertip, and said softly, almost as if to herself, "You remind me of a time I thought I'd forgotten." The words caught me off guard. They weren't playful, not like before. They carried weight, nostalgia, maybe even sorrow. I opened my mouth to ask what she meant, but she quickly lifted her cup and took a sip that wasn't there, covering herself, hiding behind the motion. I didn't push. Somehow, I knew pressing would only make her retreat further. Instead, I watched her, really watched her. The faint tension at the corner of her mouth. The way her lashes dipped lower than usual, as though she'd revealed too much and was regretting it already. That tiny fracture in her otherwise graceful composure struck something in me, something protective, something drawn to the quiet truth beneath her teasing mask. The air between us felt warmer now, thicker. Heavy not with words, but with everything unspoken. Under the table, our knees brushed. It was so slight I almost convinced myself it was accidental. But neither of us moved. The pressure was barely there, just the lightest connection, yet it carried the intensity of a shout. I felt it everywhere, the jolt up my spine, the quickened rhythm in my chest. And when I glanced at her, she was still looking at me, her lips curved faintly, though her eyes were softer, more vulnerable than they'd been all evening. We sat there like that, speaking little, saying everything, while the rain hammered against the window as if urging us closer. It was strange. I had never known someone for so short a time and yet felt such a pull. As though the silence itself was conspiring to draw us across the invisible line neither of us dared to name. I wanted to reach for her hand. I didn't. I wanted to ask what she meant by those words. I stayed quiet. But in that silence, in that fragile space between restraint and desire, I realized something undeniable. I didn't want this moment to end. Not tonight. Not ever. By the time I finally glanced at my phone, I realized how late it had gotten. The cafe's lights were dimmer now, the warm glow of the lamps fading into shadows as the staff quietly stacked chairs near the far wall. The rain outside had slowed to a mist, the rhythm gentler but still steady against the glass. She noticed me checking the time, and for the first time that evening, her expression shifted. Not cold but cautious. "It's late," she said softly, her fingers absently circling the empty rim of her cup. I nodded. "Yeah. I didn't even notice." There was a pause. Something about it felt different from the silences we'd shared earlier. This one carried weight, a hesitation neither of us had named yet. She leaned back in her chair, studying me as though she was trying to decide something. Then, with a half-smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, she murmured, "If people saw us like this, they'd whisper." The words hung in the air, heavier than the rain-soaked night. I knew instantly what she meant. The difference in years between us, her early 40s, my mid-20s, suddenly wasn't just a number. It was a boundary, a line drawn by the world outside this little cafe. I swallowed, my chest tightening. "Do you care what they'd say?" Her gaze dropped to the table. She pressed her lips together, thoughtful, almost pained. "I've learned to care more than I'd like," she admitted. "It's easier that way. Safer." I wanted to tell her I didn't care, that the way I felt sitting across from her mattered more than whispers from strangers who knew nothing about us. And I did say it, quietly, firmly. "I don't care what anyone thinks." She looked up then, eyes meeting mine, and for a fleeting moment I thought I saw relief in them. But just as quickly, she looked away, shaking her head faintly. "You say that now. You're young. The world hasn't taught you yet how cruel it can be when you step outside the lines. Her words weren't bitter, they were protective, almost maternal, but in a way that hurt more than if she'd simply dismissed me. Because I could hear the conflict inside her voice. A part of her wanted to believe me. Another part was already building walls. She rested her chin on her palm, her eyes tracing the grain of the wooden table. The posture was casual, but her expression wasn't. There was a softness there, yes, but also distance, as if she was trying to convince herself as much as me that this couldn't be anything more. I felt the ache of it deep in my chest. We were sitting only inches apart, yet I had never felt farther from her. And still, beneath the hesitation, beneath the shield of her words, there was something else in her eyes whenever she glanced up. Longing. Uncertainty. A quiet question she didn't dare ask aloud. It was that unspoken flicker, the way her guard faltered just enough, that told me the story wasn't finished. Not yet. By the time the barista dimmed the last of the overhead lights, we both knew the cafe was closing. She slipped her book into her bag, smoothing the strap across her shoulder with practiced ease. I gathered my things more slowly, reluctant to let the moment end, reluctant to accept that we'd have to step back into the ordinary world where strangers' eyes and whispered judgments waited. We walked together toward the door, neither of us speaking much. The rain had thinned into a delicate mist by then, clinging to the air under the soft yellow glow of the street lamps. Outside, the night smelled of wet pavement and distant jasmine, the air cool and damp against our skin. We paused beneath the cafe's awning, just beyond the doorway. The sound of raindrops pattering against the sidewalk filled the silence between us. She unfolded a small umbrella from her bag, her movements careful, deliberate. "Thank you for the company," she said at last, her voice quieter than it had been all evening. There was no teasing lilt this time. No smirk. Just sincerity. I nodded, searching her face. "Thank you? For letting me sit with you." She gave a small smile at that, though it seemed tinged with something else, hesitation, maybe even sadness. She shifted her weight, as if preparing to step away. And in that moment, before she could, I reached out without thinking. My hand brushed hers. Not grasping, not pulling, just the lightest touch of my fingertips against her skin. She froze. Her hand was cool from the damp air, soft beneath mine. For a second, I thought she might withdraw, retreat into the same distance she tried to put between us at the table. But she didn't. Instead, she let her hand stay exactly where it was. I could feel the warmth rising through that fragile point of contact, spreading through me like fire chasing dry leaves. She looked at me then, really looked, and I saw something flicker in her eyes, something unguarded. Her lips curved into the faintest smile, though her voice was little more than a whisper. "You really don't know what you're starting." The words carried no real reproach. If anything, they sounded almost tender, almost hopeful. The mist caught in her hair, tiny droplets glinting like silver under the streetlight. I wanted to say something, anything, that would hold her here with me a little longer. But the moment was fragile, suspended, and I didn't dare break it with clumsy words. So I just let my hand rest gently against hers, letting the silence speak for me. She didn't move away. She didn't rush to end the moment. Instead, she stood close, her umbrella half opened, her gaze searching mine with an expression I couldn't quite name, something caught between fear and longing, restraint and surrender. The city around us blurred into background noise, the soft hiss of passing cars, the rain dripping from the awning. The only thing that felt real was her hand beneath mine, and the quiet truth of what neither of us was ready to say aloud. For a moment, we just stood there beneath the awning, her hand resting lightly beneath mine. The mist hung in the air like a veil, soft and shimmering under the glow of the street lamp. I half expected her to pull away, to break the spell and retreat into the distance she'd been carefully keeping between us all evening. But she didn't. Instead, she gave a quiet sigh, almost like a surrender, and clicked the umbrella open with a soft snap. The fabric blossomed above her, catching the silver of the rain. She stepped just close enough so that its shelter stretched over me too, a small act that felt strangely intimate. Her eyes searched mine, steady but softer now, as though some hidden battle inside her had finally quieted. She leaned in, not hurried, not hesitant either, but with a gentleness that made every second stretch long and full. And then, she pressed her lips to my cheek. It wasn't a quick, casual brush. No, it was slow, deliberate. Her mouth lingered just long enough for me to feel the warmth of her skin, the faint trace of her perfume, something floral, faintly sweet, almost like jasmine after rain. My breath caught, my pulse stumbling against my ribs. When she pulled back, her lips curved into a faint, knowing smile. "If you want to keep playing with fire," she murmured, her voice low and husky, "find me here again." The words struck me with more force than I expected. They weren't a promise, not exactly. But they weren't a rejection either. They were an invitation. A warning and a doorway at once. She adjusted her bag on her shoulder, her movements calm, composed. But her eyes lingered on mine a heartbeat longer before she turned toward the street. I watched as she stepped out into the night, her umbrella tilting slightly against the wind, her silhouette framed by the glistening pavement and the soft glow of the streetlights. I stayed beneath the awning, motionless, my hand rising almost without thought to touch the spot on my cheek where her lips had been. The warmth was still there, faint but undeniable, as though her kiss had branded me more deeply than fire ever could. The world felt strangely different now, sharper, more alive. The rain smelled sweeter, the night air cooler, every sound more vivid. And yet, underneath it all, there was a quiet ache in my chest. The kind that comes when something has begun but hasn't yet unfolded. I knew I would come back. Tomorrow, the next day, however long it took. The cafe wasn't just a place anymore. It was her. It was the spark she'd lit, the fire she teased, the warmth I couldn't walk away from. As she disappeared down the misty street, her figure blending into the night, I whispered to myself, more a vow than a thought, "This isn't the end." And in my chest, where her presence still lingered, I believed it.